The task before us is a truly magnificent one. The development of the colony's resources, the opening up of the land. I see before me a vision, a new class of man, a bold yeomanry, each man working the soil. My government has made Western Australia by far the best colony in Australia for any young man who has health, strength, enterprise and spirit. The voters of the North are just as important as the voters from Perth. We have had self-government now for 7 years. What we must consider is whether we join the other states in a commonwealth. Before we do that, we must consider things very carefully. We must watch what we do.
Who watches you?
God watches me.
Thought you were God.
Thank you.
We're all immigrants in Australia, and one of the features of immigration, or one of the reasons for immigration, is to try to become more wealthy. So it's not surprising to me that the main interest of the European in Australia has been to the accumulation of wealth. And that helps to explain, I think, why Australians have been so conservative, because they came here to become wealthy. They don't like anything which disturbs or interferes with the opportunity of becoming wealthy.
For the 70 years following the invasion of the British settlers under James Stirling in 1829, the colony of the Swan River had come a long way, yet it had gone nowhere. Unlike the colonies of Eastern Australia, where a sense of place and a sense of identity emerged, the Swan River colony remained very much the private domain of the elite. Here, each and every facet of society was firmly controlled by a group generally known as the Six Ancient Families. They were people who clearly understood that the land mass of the western third of Australia was there for the sole purpose of exploitation. Here was a place where men of means could grab land and minerals to such an extent that they would be almost totally blinded to other, more civilizing values. There was no place for sloppy sentiment here. The philosophy of James Stirling and the social elite that followed him firmly believed in the creation of a colonial aristocracy, a West Australian nobility. Privileged landowners, masters of vast estates kept running by a pool of contented servants. A land that offered those things that England couldn't. The colony had been founded not with any glowing ideals for the betterment of mankind, but on selfishness and greed. a greed that needed to be fed on a continuing inflow of people. Not people who could share the land and its wealth, but workers who would create a market and economy for the few. For a time, 10,000 convicts would supply this need. But even this could not satisfy the 6 ancient families. The invasion of the tribal lands of the northern Aborigines would repeat the saga of the Swan River. Once again the cry would go out, land, millions of acres, there for the taking, except this time the conquest would not be so easy. The Aborigines would resist. Following the explorations of 2 brothers, John and Alexander Forrest, vast areas of tribal lands in the north were thrown open for speculation and development. Squatters and pastoralists, many sons of the ancient families, took up vast land holdings, introducing large flocks of sheep and cattle. Swan River Mania. A mania deeply entrenched as the dominant philosophy of life in the West.
Of course, I've always supported the uniting of the country. But the politics of the situation demanded that I hold out for a better deal. I mean, as Jesus said to the Corinthians, I will provoke you to jealousy against those who are not a nation. I will stir you to anger against a senseless nation.
Oh, come on, Sir John. How long do you think you can play that game and get away with it? Your government's sole interest has been the protection of the merchant families and the squatter barons. Your government represents the votes of 2.5 million sheep and 500,000 cattle.
Don't belittle our achievements, Walter. We've only begun to scratch the surface of this continent. It's time to stop thinking of ourselves as individuals. We're no longer just graziers and miners and merchants.
And what about the bloody workers?
Don't you give me workers. We're all workers. You're a worker, he's a worker, I'm a worker. I've spent the whole of my life working for this colony.
What about the land you've grabbed then?
Don't you get personal.
Well, what have you done for us miners then, eh?
You know that I've worked hard for the miners. Of course I have, you loud mouth.
I fail to understand how you can let these immigrant miners swarm in like ants and then give them a say in the running of the colony. They're not Westralians, are they? They don't own land here.
Madam, would you ever let them?
They wouldn't know what to do with it, even if they had it.
Do you?
What?
Do you really know what to do with it?
Are you trying to be insulting, sir?
No, Alexander, I'm not trying to be insulting. But here we all are, sitting about waiting to see if they vote on whether we join to become a nation united. But united in what?
What Walter is saying is that we have before us in this colony the most corrupting forces known to man. The desire to acquire land, more than one man or his family could ever use. The desire to acquire gold, far more than any man or his family would ever need. And of course, to get all this, the most corrupting thing of all, vast amounts of cheap labor, both white and black, completely at our disposal and completely under our thumb.
Come now, my Lord Bishop. The task before us is a truly magnificent one. The development of this colony's resources, the opening of new lands. I see before me a vision, a new class of man, a bold yeomanry, each man working the land, each family...
Ladies and gentlemen, the first results, metropolitan boxes. In favor of the colony joining the nation, 1,322. Against, 804.
How's the big man taking it?
You might say it's rising, or shall we say swelling to the occasion.
Ladies and gentlemen, the results from the boxes at Bunbury. For the colony joining the Australian nation, 493. Against, 802.
Your electorate shows a remarkable lack of interest in unity, Mr. Premier.
As the rulers of the colony waited for the outcome of the people's vote on a united Australia, George Olivey was pedalling his cycle across the northwest of Australia. Olivey's task, as Inspector of Aborigines, was to report to the forest government on the condition of the Aboriginal population of the colony. In 12 months, he travelled 2,000 miles, visiting sheep and cattle stations, pearling fleets and mining camps, dispensing drugs and blankets. His report on the condition of the black population revealed the almost total dispossession of a once proud race. Over 2,000 men, women and children were signed to sheep and cattle stations under a colonial law called the Master and Servant Act. Aboriginal people signed to stations were bought or sold with the property, the price of a station varying according to the number of workers signed on. The minimum age for signing Aboriginal children was 10. In his first 12 months, Olivey found 750 Aboriginal people in desperate need. 121 had gone blind. 378 were crippled with European disease. Syphilis, leprosy and measles had spread in the wake of the settlement of the north.
I suppose you've seen that atrocious letter in the Times.
Yes, I've advised London to ignore it. It's damaging for the settlers and for the government for that sort of thing to appear in English papers.
They're quite clearly troublemakers, completely misrepresenting conditions here.
They go on endlessly about the native question. We need to leave a lasting impression upon the minds of the natives that hostility towards the settlers will not be permitted.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the district of North East Coolgardie, Mr. Vosper's electorate, in favour 2,723, against 143.
Wonder whether the Great Paunch will react to tomorrow's paper.
Why, printing more lies?
No, American lies. We're printing this piece from the San Francisco Chronicle. The government of Western Australia looks after the welfare of the Aborigines. A long way after it. The squatters and station owners of that country have found in the black man a solution to the labour problem. When a wealthy station owner needs workmen, the mounted police are sent into the bush to round up as many blacks as they can find. The victims are then brought into the station, where the squatter is always the justice of peace and forthwith accused of sheep stealing, or would you believe, of being a vagabond.
My God, how do you become a vagabond in the bush?
Of course, being completely unpaid. I think the more correct term would be slavery.
Slavery. It was a dirty word. A word to be denied. A word to be ignored. As the 20th century was about to begin, and a new nation was about to be born, the charge of slavery and the question of Aboriginal equality cast a dark shadow over John Forrest and his followers. It was a shadow created in the time of James Stirling and inherited by nearly all who followed him. It was an attitude, and as an attitude, it was one of the fundamental principles of Swan River Mania.
Mrs. Bates told me only the other day that the last one died on the reserve just before Christmas. The native told the doctor he didn't want to die in the white man's house. Of course, he meant the hospital.
To understand that attitude, we need to go back to the beginning of the colony.
Long ago as April or May of 1770, Captain Cook said the Aborigines the natives of New Holland, I think he called them, are far happier than we Europeans. And therefore, it's understandable they should not want the gift of European civilization if they were themselves happier than the Europeans. Captain Cook said they were far happier for two reasons. One was that they had no superfluities. They produced enough and didn't want to produce a surplus for profit, for sale. In other words, the Aborigines were acceptors And this, I think, we're getting to the heart of one of the things. The Aborigine is an acceptor, the European was a dominator. Now, the Aborigine accepted the land as it was and didn't try to change it, accepted life as it was. The European came here with the instruction, go forth in the wilderness, increase and multiply and subdue it.
In 1829, the expedition under James Stirling seized the western half of Australia in the name of the British monarch. It was considered neither a conquest nor an act of war, but an invasion by occupancy. It was, in effect, a form of international squatting. The Aboriginal owners of the soil were not consulted or advised about their change of status, but they were given in return for their loss 2 great gifts: British citizenship and Christianity. The fact that they wanted neither was considered irrelevant. The bestowing of these gifts would ultimately tear the Aboriginal nations apart. For 70 years, men of religion and men of law would wage a running battle over the extent of these gifts.
There's a Jekyll and Hyde mentality about this country that pervades everything.
I think it's called money.
Deeper than that. Perhaps it's that original dream that went wrong.
True. How could 1,000 years of British law and tradition fail so completely?
For the answer to that, one must look back to 1837, to a character called Justiniani.
The present session might be said to present a remarkable era in the legal annals of this colony. The prisoners for trial are 3 Aborigines, all charged with the crime of theft. These, however, present the first of their people to be subject to the full extent of British law. As divine providence has permitted our nation to occupy this country, it is absolutely necessary that there should be fixed laws to regulate that intercourse of the settler and the savage.
In 1837, an Italian missionary sent to the colony by the Anglican Church tried to defend 3 Aborigines. His name was Louis Justiniani.
Your Worship, so long as the natives are unacquainted with the elementary principles of civilized society, they ought not to be judged by the laws of that society. It is irrational to bring before the bar of the 19th century natives who have never heard of these laws.
The charge against the Aboriginal known word: larceny of a flour bag. Upon examination before me, the accused said he did not steal the bag of flour. The prisoner said he saw the bag on the ground and took it for a cloak, as he was very cold.
Have you explained the charge to the prisoner, Mr. Interpreter?
I explained the indictment to the prisoner, who said that he'd picked up the flour bag, but that another native had stolen the flour.
Your Worship, I have exercised my powers as missionary to instruct the natives as to the privileges of being a British subject. I can state absolutely that the said native, Durgap, does not know the meaning of the word guilty or not guilty.
Ask the prisoner if he entered the plea of guilty in the hope to escape from punishment.
Sir, I have no words to express the words guilty or not guilty, trial by jury or virtue and vice.
Next.
The Aboriginal native Gugot, Your Worship.
Charge.
The accused is charged with having stolen 10 pounds of butter from Mr. Spice.
How does he plead, Mr. Armstrong?
Guilty, Your Worship.
The accused have been found guilty as charged. The Aboriginal Nunavut for stealing a flour sack, 6 months hard labor. The Aboriginal Durgap for stealing a handful of baker's dough, 7 years transportation beyond the seas. The Aboriginal Gugot, 7 years transportation beyond the seas.
Your Worship, to condemn a native to 7 years imprisonment for having stolen from behind a fence portion of his own land, which he, from his childhood, was used to dig up roots for his own support. What next?
What had started out as a show trial to teach the Aboriginal people a lesson in British law had turned out to be a travesty of justice. But it also exposed the settlers to a serious threat. If an Italian missionary, with his broken English, could defend the natives so well on trivial charges, what would happen if the roles were reversed? What would happen if the Aboriginal people, with their newfound citizenship and civil rights, took a settler to court? Judge Mackey found the answer to that problem.
I might add, the evidence of an Aboriginal native as a witness is not admissible in the courts of law in Swan River.
Giustiniani's defeat here had far-reaching consequences.
The question you've got to look at is why this failure? And I think that relates back to a more fundamental question. Why was it the Aborigine decided not to accept the gift of European civilization? That's the question we've got to answer now. And that's not an easy question to answer. But they do decide right from the start that they don't want the gift of European civilization. And that's the point of wisdom for the white man now, that the Aborigine didn't want that gift.
What happened to Giustiniani after the trial?
The man's reputation was totally discredited. The old trick. Character assassination. He was forced to pack up and leave.
Suppose they broke his heart.
Since my arrival as governor, replacing Sir James Stirling, I have taken every opportunity of ascertaining the condition of the native inhabitants of this colony. Before leaving London, I was briefed about the complaints of Dr. Giustiniani regarding the conduct of British law and justice here. What is the destiny of the Aboriginal people? Are they to be swept off by aggression and disease? Will they pine away under a feeling of immeasurable inferiority? If they survive, will it be to sink into a state little better than that of a slave? You have here in this colony a class of Her Majesty's subjects who are debarred of a true and fair trial by jury. A people whose evidence is inadmissible in a court of justice. A people who, as a consequence, may become victims of the most outrageous violence and cruelty.
Governor Hutt's concern for the course of justice was short-lived. The new governor recognized a threat, in law, to the very existence of the colony.
While they should have complete protection of their lives and their liberty, I cannot add their property. The only substantial property they ever did possess is the soil. Each separate portion of this colony, some individual native claims as an inherited right, yet we punish them for trespassing. It would be a ridiculous proposition indeed if we admitted to them the right to take civil action for the recovery of property which the English government has given a colonist. We cannot allow them access to civil law without admitting to them the right to seek redress.
Governor Hutt recognized the one opportunity the Aboriginal people may have used to stop the seizing of tribal lands, yet he remained silent. No further legal impediment would ever be raised to Swan River Mania. The first of the two great promises, British citizenship, had failed to be of any tangible value to the dispossessed. It had been a promise that, if followed to its logical conclusion, could have led to the colonists being ordered to pack up and go home. And if not that, it had the possibility of halting further taking of Aboriginal lands.
You can't have millions of acres without native labour. You know it and the squatters know it.
You should talk of land holdings. What about your huge latifundium at New Norcia? How many acres did Salvado have? 1 million?
Yes, Bishop Salvado acquired a great deal of land, but you can't dismiss him like that. If ever a man had a vision of this country, he did.
True, but a vision for the Catholic Church.
The second great promise to the Aboriginal nation by the British Crown was that of civilization through Christianity. And this time, it was through the Church of Rome that a Spanish missionary would arrive in 1846 to bring the gift of the teachings of Christ. His name was Rosendo Salvado, and he was a Benedictine monk.
January 6th, 1846. At the spot where we first set foot on Australian earth, we sat down, almost moved to tears. A few natives were in the town streets, all showing a great mistrust of the white man. February 16th, 1846. Today we set out for the great unknown. The bishop has agreed with our conclusion that the only way to convert and educate the natives is to join them in their nomadic ways. February 24th, 1846. Captain Scully's house. Today, we leave the last outpost of civilization. From here on, the land has never been touched by European feet. The land is rugged, but plentifully covered with green. February 27th. We have had no water for 3 days, and the bullocks are no less thirsty than ourselves.
Yes, I know. I'm lost. Deus Pater omnipotent sin nobis propitius et clemens, Christus perpetuated nobis gaudi vitae, ignem sui amoris accendit Deus in corbis nostris.
March 1st, 1846. Our lives had been in the hands of him who we had come to proclaim. The four of us alone in the dense bush where unknown natives lurk, where for the first time these immortal trees would hear the word of God.
Father.
Salvado took the traditional path of the great Spanish missionaries of the Americas, and in some respects, he exceeded them. Where Louis Giustiniani had failed because he had disturbed the settlers' quest for eternal peace by raising disturbing moral issues, Salvador saw the answers strictly within the confines of Christian piety and the Puritan work ethic.
July 6. We have marked off 50 acres which the governor has agreed to give us freehold. We have ploughed and sown 34 acres of wheat, a much-needed commodity if we are to draw in the natives. In our first encounter, we were successful in introducing them to flour and sugar. Word has spread about the successful crops and the soup we give each day. Natives come from every direction to have our European food. To begin civilizing them, we have made it a rule that they must cover their nakedness before they can eat. I am allotting portions of this year's ploughed land to some of the natives that helped in the clearing. They like the idea of having property of their own to watch over. I am paying each one that works a modest amount of money. But as they would lose it or give it away, I take it back and keep it safe. Each Saturday, they are allowed to count and touch it and compare the amounts each has earned against one another. April 28, 1847. After 50 days of sweat and toil, our mission building is complete. Although the natives now trust us implicitly, it was necessary for us to obtain their secrets and beliefs if we were to succeed in our task. When questioned openly about their most sacred laws and customs, they pretend not to understand, or just laugh and joke. To win in freeing them from the forces of darkness, the missionary must learn their secrets. We have gone to their campfires at night, on some pretext, and listened, pretending to play with their children. At times, I have cast doubts on some details of their customs and provoked them into revealing more. At other times, I have contradicted them, and so, by these methods, we have got to know how they think. The Aboriginal native has a belief in an all-powerful creator of the earth and the sky and of all living things. They call him Motogon. They teach that he was tall and strong and wise, and that one day Motogon blew his lips and said, "Land, come forth." And there was land. And he blew again and said, "Let there be water." And there was water. They also believe in the creator of evil. His name is Chienga. He creates all evil acts and lives in the center of the earth. From all this, I have concluded that the Aboriginal natives believe in the author of good and the author of evil, and they also believe that the human soul is immortal. March 23, 1848. Our work for Christ continues. I have today concluded the purchase of 2,560 acres for the mission.
But in gathering in his flock of ancient Australians, Salvador was confronted with that unfathomable quality that is so uniquely Aboriginal. The rejection of confinement, the rejection of the gathering and hoarding of material wealth, the total commitment to the untouched landscape. He was offering to a people dispossessed of their homeland the opportunity of regaining some of it on condition that they reject and forget 40,000 years of their heritage. He was asking them to accept a new social order based on a Christian view of life that was almost identical to their own in its equality and sharing, yet quite opposite in its practical application. They saw the offer of Christian justice and morality was based on the very values that had dispossessed them.
I believe absolutely that the first thing to do is to teach the native the means to fend for himself, the means of agriculture and of basic trade.
Of course, I disagree with Bishop Salvado's attitude. I think they are neither capable of receiving higher education nor of living in European society.
Do you know, the blacks eat 6 kinds of kangaroo, 2 kinds of possum, 29 different kinds of fish, 3 kinds of turtle, 7 kinds of lizards, 4 kinds of grubs, as well as nuts, fruit, and fungus.
I think the European came here hoping to display amity and kindness towards the Aborigine. But he very quickly changed into treating the Aborigine as a child. That's one fatal thing, I think, in the contact. The second fatal thing in the contact was the European conviction that the Aborigine was going to disappear off the face of the earth. And they didn't understand why this was so, but it was so. And therefore, even those who felt humane, and there were humane Europeans, they felt that, look, we can't do anything about it. All that we can try to do is to be as kind as possible while they disappear. Salvador is not the only one not to succeed in the Christianization of the Australian Aborigine. All the missionaries in the East had to confess failure.
Come now, Mr. James. Even you must admit that without John and Alec's explorations, we wouldn't have the vast sheep and cattle runs of the north. And then, what would your precious miners and labourers eat without the Kimberley cattle?
Queensland cattle, madam, and at half the price.
If it weren't for the wretched natives spearing so many, the price would be lower.
Oh, Margaret, don't perpetuate that old chestnut. Dear Lord, how much indignity must these poor defenseless people suffer before you accept them as human beings?
I've seen the damage we suffer with my own eyes. The natives steal and kill without any concern for who owns the animals.
Madam, in the first 60 years of this colony, we've managed to take 100 million acres from the Aborigines. Ask Alexander how many millions he controls. 100 million acres in a colony of 50,000 people. Why, madam, some of your squatter friends control properties that are bigger than Wales.
And, madam, what do you expect the natives to eat? You drive cattle into their land that fouls their only water. You drive in sheep that eat out the wild animals. You disrupt their society, and then you wonder why they spear your sheep and cattle.
I can understand your concern for the native, but as far as the settlement of this country is concerned, the lives of 1,000 Aborigines is not worth 1 European. The native has done nothing for the improvement of the land for sheep and cattle. He has done nothing, in fact, except it is a mischief. They are utterly useless.
You're referring to your own electorate, I presume. The entire cattle, pearling, and sheep industry would grind to a halt without native labor.
In April 1865, an English newspaper announced the death of Admiral Sir James Stirling. It also reported the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln died as his country was about to abolish slavery. 600,000 men had died fighting a war against the principle of all men being born free. Unlike the American experience, where Negroes were shipped across the Atlantic to work on plantations, the West Australian system involved the arbitrary seizing of tribal lands, then manipulating the traditional owners into working the land they had just lost.
Dear brethren, there are deeds done in this country, deeds so dark that I doubt you will believe their truth. My wish to build a mission for the protection of the Aborigines of this land is being menaced by the northern squatters. Ladies and gentlemen, those people are operating a system of slavery that has been outlawed for 50 years. The sheep and cattle industry up there is nothing more than a replica of the slave trade of North America.
Again, the two great gifts, Christianity and British citizenship, would surface. Again, they would fail to be of any tangible benefit to the dispossessed. Like Giustiniani and Salvado, the Reverend John Gribble was brought to the Western colony of Australia to civilize and Christianize the Aboriginal people. His Anglican mission was planned to be centered around the Gascoyne River, 600 miles to the north. But after spending 3 months in the district and traveling 400 miles inspecting sheep stations and jails, Gribble came to the conclusion that he was civilizing the wrong people.
Aborigines are being rounded up and sold into bondage, their thumbs pushed into a piece of paper that binds them to a master. If they run away, they are caught by the troopers and sentenced to prison in chains. Up there, they even chain witnesses by the neck if their skin is black. Posses of armed white men, prominent squatters riding into tribal lands, rounding up Aboriginal men and women to be sold at so much a head.
My brother and I have been settlers in the Gascoyne district for near 9 years. And we can say there is no district anywhere in Australia where so few natives have been shot. Possibly, had we shot them down instead of trying to utilize them, we would have got more praise. There are about 30 sheep stations in this district, and we keep 30 or 40 natives on each. But as for Gribble's claim that we chain the natives to barrows, there has never been any native chained to any barrow or anything else. Now, we've had a great deal of trouble settling this district and bringing the natives to their present state of usefulness.
And the pearlers, kidnapped Aboriginals, forced to die for pearls into the open sea. People who have never even seen the sea before.
It's not the first time cowardly slander has been levelled at this settlement. It's unchristian to condemn the whole district on the word of a total stranger like Gribble. And unless something is done to put a stop to it, well, there's talk of casting adrift the natives and using Chinamen and Malays instead. Gribble may be a clergyman, but the sooner he's removed from here, the better, for all concerned.
Surely Gribble's charges weren't ignored. You couldn't ignore things like that.
No, they didn't ignore it. After they had blackened his reputation, shattered his career, they hounded him from the colony. They made changes to the written law, but to the squatters' law, up there, nothing changed. As far back as 1881, the governor of Western Australia, old Robinson, told London, and I quote his exact words, "There exists in the northern districts of this colony a state of affairs that is little short of slavery." 4 years after that statement, I was appointed government resident of the North, stationed at Roban. What I found up there was unbelievable. It was unquestionably a system of disguised slavery, and not too well disguised either, and all being carried on under the protection of the British flag. Armed gangs of pastoralists would land their horses at some quiet beach, capture 20 or 30 natives, and ship them down to the islands called Lesopes. And then, they would be available for purchase to any passing pearling lugger. When I tried to stop it, I found that not only did the local magistrates and justices condone it, they were part of it. In the town itself, two notorious nigger catchers, to use the local term, who openly advertised that they would catch niggers at £5 per head, or shoot them for 2 and 6 each. My complaints to the government in Perth were totally ignored. So I wrote to London. To the Colonial Secretary, Downing Street, London. My Lord, in the interests of the black population of this district, who look to me for protection and whose liberty is directly my concern, I appeal for your intervention. At present, no wages whatsoever are paid to black men here. Native men and women are rounded up by settlers and forced to become slaves. Once a native has been captured, the settler considers the native to be his personal property. One of the settlers here punishes runaway natives by burning their feet in an open fire. He says it prevents them running away again. Another settler, who's not only a local justice, but also a member of Parliament, admits to branding runaways on the loins with the letter T. Sir, the white population of these parts talk and think of little beyond sheep and cattle. The estates are owned chiefly by capitalists down south, and most of them are members of Parliament. It is useless me presenting these matters to the government in Perth, as they are all in the same boat. Sir, in the name of these most helpless of Her Majesty's subjects, I implore you not to let go of the control of these black people by handing them over to the tender mercies of these men.
Mr. Premier, ladies and gentlemen, the final results. In favour of federation, 44,652. Against, 19,636.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends, let us not forget that the great minds in the mother country and in Australia desire this federation. And why? Because they know that union is strength. Look at it from the standpoint of experience, from the standpoint of safety, from the standpoint of financial stability, from the standpoint of patriotism for our own land and for the mother country. We should not miss this opportunity of trying to knot and weave together the various elements of this country. We are now the greatest gold-producing colony in the empire, 21 million pounds worth of gold. Even with this sort of development, we still have people who criticize us, criticize our energy, our development, our free enterprise. But this is our record, which no one can ever take from us. It is our record, what you and I have done through the years. Ladies and gentlemen, I toast the new nation, Australia.